Okay. Hi, John, would you be ready to start?
Um, yes, I'm ready to start.
Okay.
Okay. We've lost a few minutes, so I'm going to be very, very brief. Um, Good morning to everyone. I'm speaking on behalf of the University of the West Indies through the Saint Augustine Centre for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. The acronym is STACIE, and in partnership with Anton University of Suriname. The acronym is AdeKUS, and the Caribbean Disaster and Emergency Management Agency, acronym is CDEMA. I'm welcoming you to this meeting. This 4-year project is funded by the European Union under the EU ACP program and is entitled Harnessing Innovative Technologies to Support Resilient Settlements on the Coastal Zones of the Caribbean. Or the acronym is HIT Reset. Its purpose is to strengthen research and innovative capacity in ACP countries. So the overall objective of the project is to improve well-being and livelihoods of residents by creating climate-smart and resilient coastal settlements through a sustainable innovation system at the regional and national level. It will achieve this objective through a series of activities, including inter alia, competitively awarding grants for the development of innovative projects and stimulating the development of regional and national systems of innovation. And that is part of what we will discuss in this meeting as we try to seek partners who have submitted proposals, and we will give some feedback on that going forward. The project manager for this project is Dr. Perry Pola, who is online, and the principal investigator is Dr. Asad Mohammed, who is also online. The project will be executed under the Saint Augustine Centre for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, of which I, as Professor John Agard, I am the director. So I have a role as well from an administrative point of view. I will be assisted in the administration of the project by Ms. Cheryl Dubé Tiwari, who is also online and who is our Manager of Business Development and Research Funding. Our technical leads at Anton University of Suriname, AdeKUS, and the Caribbean Disaster and Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA, Angelica Namda, and Angelica, I think, is online as well, and Andrea Grovesner, respectively. So we are also going to get guidance later in this meeting from Mr. Gerard Den Uden, speaking on behalf of the European Union, Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific Office, who are the grant sponsors. I'm not seeing him online as yet, but I think he will join later. So with those few words, I'm going to try and meet the timeline because it's almost 10 past the hour. And that was the timeline in Perry's agenda going forward. So I'm going to hand back over to Dr. Perry Pula so that he can then proceed with the rest of the meeting. Thanks very much for listening.
Okay. Is everybody seeing my screen?
Yes.
Yes, Perry.
Okay.
Yes,
Perry. All right. So what I can do, I can introduce Azad to present his presentation, and I will, you just let me know when to move the slides forward.
Okay, good morning all. John introduced the overall intent of the project, and what I'm going to do is to provide a little more detail on the objectives and operationalization of the project, which will be used to guide the development and award and monitoring of the projects, of which further detail will be provided later on. Perry, can you go to the first slide, please? So the project is intended to address a few issues in the region, and the primary one is that most of the settlements in the Caribbean are on the coastal zone, and they're affected by a range of natural issues, mostly climate change and disaster issues. And over a period of time, that combined with the nature of settlement, which has large to do with haphazard, unplanned, and informal settlements, along with old layouts and old urban designs before the advent of the intensification around climate and disasters, means that the planning and management of these areas need to be rethought. And one of the things we found is that many of the institutions and organizations at the island level and even regionally were not making well use of available technologies and innovations. And in part that was due to institutional, legal, and technical capacities. Next slide, Perry. All right. So this project then intends to address these particular issues within the broader context of the ACP Innovation Fund. So our particular project really wants to look at how to harness, I'm using the word specifically, some of the digital and modeling technologies that are available to bypass some of the issues we have with respect to the collection and management of data. Because there are many technologies that are out there and available, and what we really lack in many cases is the ability to make use of it in the context of our limited technical and institutional policy and legal frameworks. So when we talk about innovation, we're talking about how to link science and technology, especially in the case of digital and modeling technologies, for the collection and management of data in the context of policy, law, and institutional capacity, and how to evolve all three to get the desired outcome of improved management, planning and management of our coastal settlements. So the other thing about the project is it is not intended to be one-off. What we're hoping to do is to foster a climate of innovation at the national level and regionally, and also to have a residual impact of an ongoing mechanism at UE and in partnership with the other institutions that support innovation. Next slide, please. Perry, can you choose the next slide, please?
I'm trying. I don't know what's happening. All right, good.
All right. So we have intentionally broken this up into two components. We have a pilot project which is being awarded at the middle of this year, and they will run for 2 years. The pilot projects, a maximum of 2 years. And next year, we will have an open call around the same time, which the call will go out very early in the year. The pilot stage are 3 projects, and the open stage are 10 projects. Now, why a pilot project? Well, from our perspective, we have sent you all a few different versions of what the call would look like. We started off with a very cumbersome one, which is really just a cut and paste from the European Union one. And we are evolving towards a more simplified one that is suited to the requirements and the capacities in the region. And therefore, from our end, we find that we are evolving. So even the last version, the revised version we sent to you, we have now realized when we got the preliminary responses from you, that there are issues with it. So we will be resolving these issues, and we'll discuss this a bit later on. We will be working with pilot applications, irrespective of the initial feedback we give you, to try and improve the proposals as they come in, and even during the implementation of the proposals to the rest of this year, the projects, so that when we're ready for the open call, working together with the pilot projects, we would resolve the call, the management, and so on of it. So the range of these projects are minimum of 150,000 euros to 210,000 euros. When we had initially sent out the call, we had said there was an additional 15% co-financing that is required. We would still want you to identify that. We are working out with our colleagues at the European Union how we record and manage the co-financing elements. So you can add, for the time being, 15% upon this that will come from co-financing elements in your projects. The lead applicants and the actions are only in the CARIFORUM countries, that is CARICOM plus the Dominican Republic. The one exception is that Montserrat, which is a member of CARICOM, is a territory of the UK and is not eligible. And like I said before, each of the individual projects, our overall action is what we call the action. Our overall action is 4 years, but the individual projects have to be implemented within 24 months. So when we say favored criteria, there's a mix of what our project's objectives are, plus what the objectives that were in the actual call, the things they were sponsoring. So we don't expect that every project will hit every one of these. It's not a checkbox we're trying to look at that you state each one of these things. These are the general criteria that our specific project and the overall project aims to support. So, for example, the first one, support local and indigenous knowledge in combination with formal knowledge systems and practices. That is a part of the overall call. And for example, in the Pacific Islands, less so than in the Caribbean, in parts of in Belize and the Guyanas, there are much more indigenous knowledge systems than here. So we are not necessarily saying that you must do this. If there is an element of indigenous knowledge with the formal knowledge systems, that'd be very good. So these are the general criteria, and we expect that you will hit a few of them. We like to see them aligned with one of the Sustainable Development Goals, one or more. We would require that the projects have the potential for scaling up and have a replicability in other parts of the Caribbean. Is not a one project, even though a good one-off project would be very good. There'll be other aspects of it that may be applicable, even the geographical and physical context may not be replicable. And we would like to see that there is ownership of these projects as they develop, not by the institution developing it, but by some public agency, government, communities, and so on. Next slide, please, Perry.
I'm trying to move it forward. Okay.
All right. So the evaluation of the projects have in some sense to do with those objectives we just said, but they also have to do with how well the project is structured, how well it is thought out, how you're going to manage it, how you're going to work with some other body. And these are the specific layout that we've had. But I want to re-emphasize with you that at the pilot stage, we will choose projects that may not necessarily meet all of these criteria, but we intend to be working with you in this particular workshop when we have individual feedback to see how our suggestions to strengthen the proposal that goes in. And like I said, even after we have awarded the 3 pilot projects, we expect to continue to work with you to revise and rethink certain projects. As you know, when you when you're doing a project, sometimes there is a inception report stage, at which time you reevaluate what you've done and where you're going. And we expect that the evaluation and monitoring system that we have will allow us, especially in pilot projects, to redirect and to upgrade and improve both our mechanisms for managing the projects, our identification of the tools we need for the calls, and the implementation of the project. So this is the evaluation that we will be using formally for it. But like I said, we expect that we will have flexibility in working with the projects. Perry, the next slide, please. So I have said these two things before, but let me emphasize it again. We intentionally have pilot projects, and we don't expect that everything is worked out of either from our end or yours. We've been changing and upgrading and reviewing ours, mostly simplifying, and we expect that we will be doing that. This workshop is one of those things. We lay out some of the issues we have with you, that we have to manage the project. You'll get some feedback on the general procedures. Then we'll have one-on-one sessions, and we expect that you will have the opportunity to do a revision before your final submission on the 11th. And subsequent to that, there'll be continuing developmental activities with the projects. Next slide, please. So these are the specific objectives of this particular workshop. We've talked a bit about the purpose of Hit Reset. We will want to explain the project cycle. That is project cycle generically for project management. We want to talk about some minimum reporting and actions on the pilot projects. We will give you some information on financial reporting. We want to get some of this information out very early. You do have to prepare a budget, but it is useful that you know what are the reporting requirements. We don't want people to be undertaking expenses without clarity on that. Maybe Gerard will talk a bit more about that as well. In the end, you have to account to us and our partners, and then we have to account to the EU for every dollar we spend. European taxpayers' dollars, they're very careful in how they spend it. And we want to be sure that the project is achieving the overall objectives. We will have one-on-one sessions with each individual project to tell you what are some of the issues we raised in the initial, I'm using the word initial assessment, because we will have another assessment after you've had a chance to review and correct those. Next slide, please. All right. So what I've done really is to introduce some of the broader issues of what this workshop is intended to do, and a little more detail from what Professor Agard had presented on the purpose and intention of the project within the context of the European Union Innovation Project. So now what we will do is we'll go through specific elements which I talked about, but what we've decided is to allow one or two questions for immediate clarification, and we will decide what we'll hold for the question and answer period later on, and what issues we could clarify immediately. So if there are any immediate questions that people have, I said we'll take 2 or 3 maximum at this point. You just simply raise your hand if you have a question. Perry, I'm not seeing any questions. What I would like to do is to make one more statement. Then, therefore, if there are no questions before we go on to the next item, and that is, there are a couple of components in the guidelines that we want you, and the proposal you must do. One is a technical description of the project, a layout, a justification, and so on, which is the first part. And there's some annexes which we require. Some of the annexes require a budget, we require a log frame, and these things are really to help you to work through the project a bit better. And then there's some signature and other requirements on it. So that what we've done really is to try and focus mostly on the technical aspects, but we will need to fine tune some of those other elements involved. And I would just make one comment, and that is perhaps our fault in how we've done it. I don't think that we really have asked you all to have an overall concept, a description of the project that is very clear and succinct at the front of it. So sometimes we have to be searching in the document to find that. So just a general comment, and we could talk about that a bit more in this session and a bit later on. All right, Perry, I see no further questions. I think we could move on to the next.
Okay, well, I'd like to now put up Cheryl's presentation. And Cheryl has already been introduced. So let me see. Okay. So are you all seeing Cheryl's presentation here? Is it on screen?
It is, Barry. This is Cheryl. Thank you. I hope everyone can view the screen just fine. Thank you very much, Azad, because you've created a very smooth entry for me and my presentation this morning. So let's just get right into it. Okay, so just one more click, please, Perry.
Okay.
So we're going to look at the key aspects of proposal development as well as the project cycle. So these are two, although they may appear to be distinct phases, I would like to very, very strongly suggest and recommend that they go hand in hand. So there's a reason we call it a cycle, and I'd like for us all to keep that in mind at all times. Proposal development is a unique and discrete phase, but in developing a proposal and conceptualizing how you are going to articulate your problem, or that which you have identified as something that is worth investing in and requires a solution, while conceptualizing that and articulating that, it's very important to relate it to the project cycle. And I will speak about what exactly that project cycle is. And what that requires is that you move really back and forth or within the cycle of while you are developing your proposal and conceptualizing and thinking about resources, allocating resources, how much budget you're going to assign to each of those resources, what you wish to accomplish, how you're going to track, and as I had mentioned, criteria and the KPIs and those types of things. It's very important that you understand how they relate and how they work together as you move along. So it's a continuum that you're expected to move back and forth along. And this is something that people oftentimes do not think about. They think about these two as two discrete and totally separate, unrelated phases. But I would dare say that that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that one can make. Okay, Perry, let's go on.
Okay, one sec.
Sure.
Right.
So let's start first with the project cycle, and then we will go into the proposal development. Because again, as I said, they interrelate and it's depicted here. So when we talk about starting the cooperation and recognizing the idea and preliminary planning, what do we look for there? So what we look for specifically is the project need or a problem identification. Let's please remember that what we do not want to do at any point in time is put plasters on sores. So we're not to treat symptoms of problems, but in fact, take very good care at doing research, understanding what has happened in the past, to be able to properly and correctly identify the problem that you're trying to solve. In recognizing the idea and starting to design the project, it's important to understand the current situation, which forms your baseline. Okay, and that's qualitative and quantitative. Gives you the percentages, it gives you the numbers, it gives you the data. So when you identify correctly what exists and you know what you wish for the ideal to be in the current context, within the culture or the community that you're trying to implement the solution within, or country or region, you will then recognize, obviously, that there is a gap between where you are and where you would like to be at the end of the project. So in designing the project, doing a feasibility study, understanding the gaps and what's the likelihood of closing those gaps in a realistic way that is aligned with what the funder wants to see and is willing to fund, and that it falls within the funding ceiling prescribed to you. It's always very, very important, and again, strongly advised that at this point, very early on, that you identify the project manager. And this person is the person who is going to help you to identify those milestones, or those key points along the time frame of your project that are those to be monitored and evaluated on. Because as we say, what can't be monitored cannot be managed. And I know Lenice, I mean, I don't want to step on Lenice's territory there, but I'm sure that, you know, she's going to raise those aspects. But also understanding that you cannot monitor, and not everything is worth monitoring. So you have to give a little thought and a little time into thinking and considering what are those points or key milestones or key achievements that will result in summation, will result in you achieving the goal that you would like to achieve or your objective. When the funding decision, given that everything has gone well, as I touched on, meeting all of the administrative criteria, the checklists, presenting a realistic budget, understanding terms such as co-financing, those are very, very important. So given that all of that has been done and has been done in a rigorous and defensible way, a funding decision is made, a project then engages the implementation and execution phase. At certain key points, it will be monitored, and depending on how it has been structured, and sometimes depending on the length of the project, there will be midterm evaluations. There may be just one evaluation along the way. And then at the end of the project, or at the closing of the project, there are very key lessons that should be documented from the conclusion and successful closure of every project, whether they are lessons that you will learn and items that you swear you will never repeat, or whether there are certain attributes of planning, managing, implementing, evaluating, and closing projects that must also be documented, because these are the things that you want to repeat. I don't know, for those of you who may have been following along very closely with me, there's a spelling error on this slide. I amended some of the content of my presentation after evaluating the proposals that you submitted. And there are a few it may sound pedantic, but please, and we all do it, we all make spelling errors. But spelling errors really is an unnecessary distraction to the persons evaluating your proposal. Please be very careful with with grammar and spelling, etc. Next slide, please, Barry. Okay, So I now jump into the proposal development, and I have outlined about three general phases in the interest of time. And from what I've read from those who have submitted, and some of you whom I know, you've done this before, and this is familiar territory to you, and that was very nice to see. So I won't spend too much time on issues that I've already raised, but correctly identifying the problem and not the symptoms. If you do not do this correctly, you will not generate the impact or the result that you would like to see at the end of your 2-year period and after having spent approximately 210,000 euros, which is a tremendous amount of money and can generate enormous impact over time. But that's provided that you have correctly identified the problem. Your evaluators usually know very well what money has been given to whom and for what. And they also know, they share information. You know, something like the way banks do it, they share certain amounts of information, and they know what was done in the past, what was funded in the past, what was successful and what was not successful. And that is why doing research and understanding what has gone and doing feasibility studies are important. Doing your research is important. Okay, so moving on to this third point, engage with stakeholders. Sorry, Perry, but it's all right. We can stay on this slide. Engaging with your stakeholders as early as possible in helping you to design your proposal and helping you to understand what is really required, because the stakeholders are those that you hope to have the buy-in from. And if I can draw a reference to one of the proposals, one of the proposals actually is relying or hopes to rely very, very strongly on stakeholder involvement. Stakeholders must be aware of what they are expected to invest very early on, because they also need to make provisions for investing and collaborating with you on your project. If you communicate with them too late, when you've already, and it's a fait accompli, and you go to them with that, they can say, but you know, there was no consultation with us and we can't do this, we're sorry. And that leaves you in a very precarious position. And you don't want to find yourself in that type of position. So early stakeholder engagement and agreement and commitment is a very, very important aspects. Second aspect, now when you are ready to articulate the plan. So express what you wish to accomplish should be done realistically. And by realistically, I mean in terms of timing to get it done. I know we all try to be very impressive. I write proposals, so I know, you know, you want to impress those evaluating you. And you want to show that, you know, we can accomplish a lot in the shortest time frame, using resources as best as we can and managing all identifiable risks, all things remaining equal, that is, that these risks have been identified and they can be contained and managed over the duration of the project. But please be very truthful and honest with how you peg the achievement of what you want to the time frame that you have assigned, to the resources, and resources, I mean, it could be capital resources, human resources, of course, and any other, in terms of budget. So even in generating a budget, you will have to do your research and you have to justify your budget. And the risks. Your risks cannot be high probability, high impact. That overall puts your project at a very tenuous position. So as far as possible, what you will try to do is design your project in a way that your risks are managed. And we manage risks in different ways. You can transfer the risk, eliminate the risk, you can mitigate the risk, and you have to determine, you being the proposal writer with your project manager, or to discuss what is the best way to manage the risk. If your design is too risky, your funders are also going to pick up on that. And of course, you know, there will be additional considerations. You're expressing what you wish to accomplish or to be done in a logical and justifiable way. So by logical, that's why we ask for you to generate the logical framework. It helps you to think through your project in a sequential, logical manner. So any gaps you may have in planning and budgeting usually present themselves in that document. Okay, next slide, please, Perry.
Okay, good.
All right. So now, in as much as you understand the risks, there may be opportunities that can compound your benefits, and funders ask for these as add-on benefits. Add-on benefits, funders really like to see that because it compounds the return on investment for the funder. So if you know that you've allocated a certain proportion of money in generating a particular output, then,
Sorry.
that's all right. I take the hint, Perry. I'm almost
No,
done.
that was accidental.
If we can just go back one slide.
Okay.
So identifying the opportunities that you can capitalize on is wherever you can do that, please do that. Can we go back just one up?
Okay, I'm trying it. Not. I think it's my computer is slow.
Oh, all right. Well, I'll just speak in the meantime, because I'm sure we can share these. What I want to suggest in as well, just referring to the slide before, is please continue looking at the evaluation criteria, because this is what the evaluators are going to score you on. So as you write, please ensure, and you think you've completed a portion, go to the evaluation criteria and feel comfortable that you have satisfied what is being looked for specifically and looked at. I would advise that you please don't try to squeeze or force feed a particular concept into what the funder wants to fund. Alignment is very important. Okay, so let's just, I can wrap this up now. So if you can move backward and forward along the spectrum of project cycle management and proposal development, then you will more than likely generate a winning proposal. More than winning the proposal, please. Winning the proposal is good and is cause for celebration. But please, it's just the beginning. How well you implement and execute a proposal, a project, that's what you will be remembered for. And funders do remember you as being very weak, very strong. So they may say, well, you're very good at winning proposals, but you are not very good at managing for success and managing for results, which is why I strongly recommend that you remember all the time that there is a link between proposal development and project cycle management. So we can now go to the end. I thank you very much for your attention. Good luck with all of us moving forward, and we look forward to working with you over these coming years. Thank you very much, Perry, and back to you.
Okay, having a little problem with the speed of the computer there. So I think we'll go on to my presentation.
Perry,
Yeah, we should have some questions, yes.
if anybody, first of all, let me just start by saying that was very clever of Cheryl to introduce that spelling error in her first slide so she could make the point about not leaving irritating things in your proposals. Anyway, that was just a light comment. Can we allow any specific questions to Cheryl before we move on to Perry's presentation?
Okay, if there are no questions, I think we can move on to my presentation. What I would like to see is that we've had some requests for sharing of the video, but I probably didn't enable it before I set up the meeting. So what I will do is I will share the video with you via Dropbox after the meeting. Okay, so in terms of my presentation, I'm looking at mandatory actions, and it's things that we would want you to have in your proposal, your pilot proposal. So to start with, we want you all to set up a project management team. If you're awarded a proposal, you should have a project management team. Preferably, the team should have, well, it should have the technical persons, but you could also consider having someone from your bursary, someone from communications, some stakeholders, just to give it a more diverse, a diverse group of people. Because sometimes achieving the technical aspects is one thing, but you also need different aspects. Visibility is very important in this project. So you want somebody who is also thinking along those lines. You want the project management part of it to be solid. Doing the scientific or the innovation elements is one thing, but you have to make sure things are recorded, documents are submitted. So it's good to have a wider range of people on your project management team, but that is up to you. Now, we are recommending that you hold meetings quarterly at minimum, right? Because what we're going to be asking you to do is actually send us a very brief update, a little one pager, you know, yeah, a one pager every quarter to let us know where you are relative to the objectives that you've stated. So you know, we this is part of our monitoring of the project. So if you're not meeting your objectives, we'll want to know this. No, it's not there to penalize you. It is really so that we can have a discussion and see how we can adjust the dates for when you're achieving the objectives. If you're having challenges, what changes we can make. We want to be very involved in your project to help you achieve your objectives. So it's not there to really penalize you. So when we will ask you to send in minutes of your project. And why we're asking to do that is that we want to know that you're having meetings. Because what often happens is that people get projects and they don't have the meetings and things start to slide. Now, I would recommend when you do your minutes, all we want to know is what do you plan to do, when, by whom, you know, action-oriented minutes. We're recommending that you use action-oriented minutes because it will help you in your project management. But this is more for you than for us. We just want to know that you've had a meeting, but it is beneficial if you use action-oriented minutes. Moving on, we don't have the system in place as yet, but we are going to develop a project performance tracking system. And what this is going to do is that if it was up, you would be submitting your proposals online. But what it will do, it will allow you to put up your outputs, set your deadlines, and we will determine whether or not, or you will inform us whether you've met the deadlines for your outputs or not, right? And if we negotiate and produce new deadlines, we will put up the new deadlines. Now, what that does, it keeps us aware, given that we're managing, we're going to end up managing at least 13 projects. So we need to know, where each of these projects are. And we can't keep this information in our head. We want to have an online system where we can easily track and know if a project is falling behind or not falling behind, right? What it will, we also allowing you to do, and the bursary will speak a little bit more about this. Every 6 months, while every quarter we'll ask you to send in your bills, right, for processing, if there are bills that you need to process. You definitely will have to send in your original bills every 6 months. But what the repository of the financial documents will allow you to do is to post these financial documents online so that you know you've sent them, we know you've sent them. If it's not online there, then we could actually say, okay, we do need this document or that document and you didn't send it, right? So it allows us to know what financial documents have been sent back and forth, right? All this allows us to manage each of these individual pilot projects better. Now, we also going to have an escalation feature. This is the equivalent of talking to your parents if you don't follow the rules. What happens in projects is that sometimes we're dealing with the technical lead, but for whatever reason, the technical lead is not responding, and we don't have any way of contacting other persons. So what we're going to ask you to do is provide alternative people to that will be contacted if we can't get through the technical lead, even if it's somebody higher up in the decision-making level, to know that we can resolve a problem. Because oftentimes, and this is from experience, the technical leads sometimes they don't communicate when they have a problem, and that's not the way we want to go. We want to make sure that there's communication. So we're going to build in some things into this project performance tracking system, which will allow us to make sure that projects are managed properly, and it will benefit you as well, because you are also going to be seeing what's there at a glance. Now, the Caribbean Urban Forum, for all of you who aren't familiar with the Caribbean Urban Forum, it is it's a conference we've been holding since 2011, and it brings together planners, high-level decision makers, other urban professionals in a 3-day meeting, and we do capacity building, we do policy discussion, and knowledge sharing at this meeting. So it's actually been advancing a lot of the agendas in the urban environment for the last 10 years. So we have a lot of multilateral agencies, UNDP, the IDB, we have the Caribbean Development Bank, we have lots of organizations there. We have a lot of planning associations, Caribbean planning associations, the Commonwealth, a lot of different planning associations are there, individual countries, individual planners. So it's really a very unique space for us to target the audience that is involved in the planning sector in the Caribbean and sometimes outside of the Caribbean. So what we plan to do at this meeting, now, in the 2021 meeting, which will be held between the 16th and the 18th of June, we are going to ask all of you who have submitted projects at the pilot stage to give basically a 7 to 10 minute presentation on your project, a very short presentation, just give an overview. But we're first going to have a discussion basically on innovation systems in the region and internationally. and it will lead into the presentations of these projects, because we want to start the dialogue on innovation systems in the region. And we also want people to know the kind of work that is being proposed. But we're asking each of you who have submitted to present, because we haven't selected, we want to have selected the projects at that stage. Now, given that the audience is going to be so broad, it is an opportunity to generate interest in your projects, because this could also help you in sustainability. If a country is interested in your project, you can have a discussion with them, and you never know, you might be able to do additional work or future work in that country. It can very well resound to your benefit. But also think of the Caribbean Urban Forum in your long-term sustainability in your project development. If you need to hold a workshop specifically to target, let's say, Caribbean planners, you could organize a workshop at the Caribbean Urban Forum. We're open to the idea. It can't be done at this one, but we're also asking you to be present at the one in 2022 and 2023. So you have the opportunity to plan workshops or sessions whereby you at least communicate what is happening in your project. Now, you will have to do that anyway, but in a more detailed way, if you wanted something specific to communicate or do with a planning audience, then this is your opportunity. So keep that in mind. So hopefully in 2002 and 2003, it will be a physical meeting, but we will wait and see what happens. The other things that we want you to do, we want you to have a communications and visibility plan. We can't stress this enough. It's a requirement for the EU as well, but it's important to know who your stakeholders are and what you need to say to them. How do you keep them aware, right? And visibility, you also have to pay attention and put resources into visibility. We want people to know about your project. We want people to know about the Hit Reset program. We want people to know that this has been supported by the EU, the ACP, etc. So give some thought to it, because sometimes we, as we work in projects, we pay attention to the science of it too much, or just the technical aspects. But a successful project has many elements, and part of it is the ability to communicate your message. And communicating your message will help you with sustainability and embedding, which is a big aspect in this project. We don't want you to just create a technology. We want a technology that is embedded. Now, stakeholder consultation is another thing that we've made it mandatory. If you did stakeholder consultation before, during the project development stage, that's excellent. It will be very good for your proposal. We'll look at it in a very good light. But we also want you to have stakeholder consultation during your project, because we want to know that you've had feedback. Now, this is something that we're asking even in the stage before you submit your final proposal. We're asking, at least, given that it's COVID, at least send your proposal to a couple people and get their feedback first, right? So that so that at least we know, yeah, you're not just taking a narrow view of the thing. But during the life of the project, we're asking you to be in communication with stakeholders. If you're organizing a national workshop or a specific workshop, or you're having one-on-one meetings, all that will be reflected in your communication plan, right? But do have stakeholder consultations. Now, during the life of the projects, we are going to produce popular communications, right? So we are going to ask you to write up in sort of layman language what you're doing and where you've reached. And we will take these communications and we will finalize it. We'll ask you to take pictures and such, you know, and we will produce a popular communication. We'll do it for the pilots and we'll do it for the open call projects. Another thing is the end of year narrative and financial reports. You will have to provide information for us at the end of the year on what you've done in your project. We'll provide you templates. And as well, you know, you will also need to provide us with a financial report so that we know we will be checking it against our accounts, but we will want to know how you spent the funds, you know. So you'll have to do that for us before our reporting, because we at UE will have to be doing the reporting to the EU, but we will want to take the information you provide to us and put it in our reports to move forward. Evaluation exercises. What we've done in this project is to bring on an internal evaluator from the beginning of the project, and that's Dr. Lenise Batiste. And so she will be presenting shortly, but throughout the process, we're going to use the Caribbean Urban Forum as an opportunity for the evaluator to talk to you, right? And get an idea of where you are in the project. You know, there may be surveys and such, and post the project, we're also going to do evaluation exercises. So what we're saying is that we're asking you all to work with the internal evaluator so that we can do proper evaluation. Now, the purpose of this, of course, is that if something is going wrong, we know immediately, we can have a discussion, we can correct it, right? Don't wait till the end of the project to let us know you're having a problem. Having a problem is not a problem. It's how you resolve the problem that is important. So this is what is going to allow our projects to be successful, having this level of dialogue and feedback. Now, we're also going to ask you to consult myself for any purchases above 5,000 euro, because there are some EU rules. We didn't specify it in detail in the guidelines because it's a lot. So what we're saying is that if you are going to purchase anything or any service above 5,000 euro, talk to us first, and we will double check with the EU to make sure that it's eligible. And once it's eligible, we will get back to you. But, you know, give us some time. And as I said, let's keep talking and throughout the life of the project. And that's my presentation. Any questions? No questions? Okay, I'm glad everything is clear. Can we therefore move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the financial reporting requirements from the bursary? I think Crystal, Carol is going to present on this.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Yes, Perry, that's correct. Okay, so if you can just put up the slide.
Got it.
Okay, so this EU ACP project is financially managed by the bursary Saint Augustine campus, the special project section. The section is responsible for the management of funds for research grants, and specifically, number one, the management of the project budget to ensure that the budget line expenditure is within limits and within bursary policies and procedures and EU guidelines. Number two, the submission of yearly reports to the EU. Number three, we have to manage the audit for the yearly expenditure verification report. That's where we have external auditors coming in to review the expenditure on a yearly basis. And then we deal with any other financial related matters. So Perry, can you go to the other slide, please? So basically what we wanted to do is give you some information on what you would need to provide for us with regards to funding. We have basically a couple items that we wanted to go through with you. The first is the request for funding via tranches. That's when you would like to request a particular tranche from us. Our biannual financial reporting, which is done half yearly. So you give us an idea of what your expenditure has been like for the past 6 months. Any other documentation, for instance, contracts, HR contracts. We also want to specifically discuss the fixed asset purchases because that is an item that will be managed by the bursary. So Perry, can you move on to the second slide? So the first item, the request for funding via tranches. Tranches will be supplied to each grantee upon request. All funds will be issued in the country's currency and processed via wire transfer. Now, we have been getting a couple of problems with our bankers in terms of relevant currency. So I just want to point out that sometimes if you ask us to wire funds to you in your country's currency and it's not available, we might advise you on another currency. Say, for example, Suriname, we cannot wire your funds in your country currency. We'll be able to wire it in USD equivalent. A template will be forwarded for you to supply the relevant wire transfer information for us so that we can wire your funds to you. Now, in order for you to access the tranches, we're asking that you send a signed memo together with a detailed budget to the bursary requesting the funds. And obviously, at the end of the project, any unutilized funds has to be returned to the UWI. Perry, can you go to the other slide, please? Our biannual reporting, what we've decided to do in order to not make it onerous on the grantees, we're asking that you send biannual or half-yearly reports. So basically what we're asking you to do is send your expenditure for every 6-month period. In addition to sending your expenditure, we're asking you to send soft copies of all your supporting documentation. So this might be your invoices, it might be quotes, it might be receipts, copies of contracts for consultants. What we would ask you to do is have your soft copies in separate folders. We would like them by month and also by date. So in cases where we have our external auditors coming in, they can view it specifically in chronological order by month and date, and also the auditors specifically request original copies as well. So we're also asking you to submit your original documentation. This can be done biannually as well, or as Perry stated before, if you feel that you would like to do it on a quarterly basis, that's not a problem either. But I just want to reiterate that we do need original documentation for every expenditure that you would make. Terry, can you move on, please? So we have a financial checklist for the grantees, and this is basically a document that you would submit together with your biannual half-yearly reports. And it's just a checklist that you would check off to ensure that all the items that we request is attached to your documentation. So for instance, we would need a memo from the grantee, perhaps the project lead, together with the expenditure report and soft copies of the documentation. You can courier the hard copies for us. We would also need, as I stated, soft copies of all the invoices, receipts, payments. So you'll see the list going down there of exactly what you need. Perry, can you move on? So this is an idea of what your statement of income and expenditure would look like for your biannual period. Your income side would have the funds that were wired to you. And basically what you're doing is filling out the first column, which is the local currency amount. So whatever local currency expenditure that you have, you state it. So we have your income coming in. you list the amount that you've received per wire. So let's say, for instance, you've received 2 tranches for the year. You include each tranche as a separate amount. You'll also see 2 additional columns. That's for bursary use, and we would use this when we are preparing our yearly reports to the EU. Your expenditure side, we need a little detail. So again, we have your month, your date, and also vendor name and description. So more or less, if you have any problems with the statement of income and expenditure, you can always liaise with the bursary. We are here for you. Feel free to email us whenever you need to, and we can advise if you need help with the statement of income and expenditure. Perry, can you move on, please? The procurement guidelines. So we are guided by our UE procurement policies and guidelines. We also have it online and available. What we've decided to do is, for all fixed asset purchases, we're asking all grantees to have the purchases be done by UE on the grantee's behalf. And the reason for this is for record purposes. Our university normally keeps track of all our fixed assets. We have individual fixed asset numbers attached to each fixed asset. And generally, for audit purposes, we have a fixed asset register. So at any given point, at a glance, auditors can view a list of all our fixed asset purchases. We also have guidelines on how you go about procuring your fixed assets. Now, I'm assuming here that the majority of the fixed assets for these projects would be equipment and computers and peripherals related. So in addition to your laptops, computers, you might have scanners, printers, and any sort of peripherals related to computers. We've just given you a brief here. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. We would send you our templates, which would have additional information on how you go about procuring your items. So for instance, here we have listed any fixed asset, 10,000 and over, we would need a justification memo signed by your authorized representative or your project lead. We would need comparable quotes. We would also need your invoice from your vendor that you have justification, a single source provider, meaning that the item that you have purchased cannot be sourced from any other vendor. The payment method for the vendor must be clearly stated. You need to tell us whether they would like funds wire transferred. Preferably, we would like funds to be wired, given the COVID situation right now. We're very rarely doing check payments. So we would ask that you ask your vendors to supply detailed wire transfer instructions for us. Original documentation, again, we would need that for audit purposes. So if you have requests for fixed asset purchases, you can send it as soft copy, and at the biannual reporting, you can send us your hard copy documentation. Perry, next slide, please. So for the fixed asset purchases, we're just giving you some simple guidelines on how you go about purchasing your fixed assets. Again, we're asking for a memo to be sent to the bursary. It must be signed by a duly authorized representative / your project lead. You need to attach all your quotes and the related invoice to the purchase. Again, if a sole provider is used, you need to give us a justification for the use of the sole provider. Include your payment method, example wire transfer, and all the details that goes along with us. And then we will review all your documentation. Again, original documentation is needed apart from you sending us soft copies. Perry, next slide, please. So in addition to our financial documents, we're also asking if you need help with any other issues. Say, for instance, contract the services for consultants. We can provide you with a template that we use at the bursary. We can forward it to you. If you have your own template, you can also use it as well. And we're also asking, when you issue contracts for services, that you have requisite CVs attached to each contract for review. Next slide, please, Barry. Yeah, so that's it for my presentation. If we have, does anyone have any questions?
Carol, I have some questions. I said here.
I figure you would.
Well, as you know, you have provided support for other previous projects we have run at the bursary, other EU projects. And I was just noting that there is a potential difference between the procedures for the EU and the procedures for UWI in terms of dollar value or euro value by which certain types of rules kick in. Your presentation implies that the UE rules will be used rather than the EU rules. Is that true?
Actually, Dr. Mohammed, that isn't true. We are guided by the EU guidelines and we would operate within EU guidelines. With regards to items such as procurement of fixed asset items, we would be guided by our UE procurement rules. But with regards to yearly reporting, again, we are guided by the EU guidelines and we would work within those limits.
Oh, no, I was just clarifying that point because what you had there were the UE fixed asset procurement rules, which is the 10,000 PT dollars.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that is a little bit different from the EU guidelines, which is a little higher. I just some reason the point.
Okay, Dr. Mohammed, that might be something that we would have to look into and possibly get back to the grantees on, because as far as I'm aware, we are keeping within our procurement guidelines. So I would have to review the procurement guidelines of the EU and probably get back to the grantees on that. So
Okay,
we can
so
get a specific answer on that.
yeah, so we will have a discussion, and we will probably have to have it with the technical advisory unit.
Yes.
I see Gerard is in the meeting.
Yes.
So we may need to clarify that, Gerard, to make sure that at least the minimum that what we're doing is acceptable to your unit in the EU.
Yeah.
And that also, I suspect each individual institution will have their own minimum rules as well. So they might even kick in before ours.
Yes. Yes. Can I? Yes,
Sure.
I'm off muted, or can I talk?
Yes,
You're
yes.
you hear, you know,
Sure. Yeah. Thank you very much. Indeed, Crystal and Assad. It is the answer of Crystal was perfectly clear and correct. The regulations which are followed by the EU are the following. First of all, you have to apply your own corporate rules. And when you do this, you are fine. But when you do this, you should also take into consideration the EU rules. Now, with respect to the EU rules, it means if they are sometimes, they can be less rigid than your own ones. Then you apply still your own rules. That's not a problem. Sometimes they are the same. But if they are less than the EU rules, yes, then you have a problem. For example, it's very simple. When you're going to ask for a tender, we are asking you should at least consult 3 suppliers. Now, if you do 3, that's fine. Then you are in line with it. It's very simple. So the answer of Crystal is completely correct. You apply the UE ones, and when you apply them, you make sure they are aligned with the EU ones. That's how it works.
Thanks a lot, Jared. I have actually, Crystal was the one who prepared it, but Carol is the specified person for this project at the bursary, and she's the one doing the presentation. Carol, I have one other question for you. We have in the past used 2 formats for the procurement of fixed assets. One of them is that the person supplies a justification and the costs and so on, and we send an accountable advance to them. And the other one is that we procure directly. And I know we have used both rules in various ways, and they each have their own problems. One is that for the accountable advance, we don't get the documentation and so on as we had wanted and we had discussed, and it becomes problematic in the annual reporting and the final expenditure verification report. But the other one, which is that we procure we procure it directly, we pay for it directly. Sometimes have introduced issues of time and wire transfers and so on that have complicated the availability of the equipment or the asset at the time when it's needed. So I just wanted to know whether it will be applied with what you said across the board, or is there any flexibility based on the contingencies of the moment? And Jared, I wouldn't mind if you also respond to that.
Well, based on the experiences we've had with previous EU projects and the fact that, as you said, there have been some issues where we send advances for the purchase of fixed assets, and then we have problems in procuring documents. What we've decided to do at this time is to actually procure the items themselves from the UWI's point. So in terms of flexibility, I guess we can look at that, but I would prefer if all the fixed asset purchases actually go through the UE system and that we have a record of it on our fixed asset register. And I'm only looking at this from the perspective of audit, to ensure that we maintain audit guidelines with regards to the fixed asset purchases. So that's my main issue there.
Well, Carol, let me follow up on this. And Gerard, I'd like to get your opinion on it as well. Look, we know that we have tried to procure equipment from a third party to be delivered, for example, in a previous project in Guyana. So supposing there is a Guyanese applicant in one of the phases for a project and they awarded it, we have run into problems in delivery of equipment from parties we have procured. And in the end, we found it more efficient that they did the paperwork and so on. And once we verified it, we did the actual purchase. But I'm just wondering now about whether the issue of whether all the assets procured in 13 projects throughout the region, any one of the CARIFORUM countries, especially, for example, in the DR where we haven't really been operating, whether in fact we may need to introduce some level of flexibility in what really works at the time to make sure we don't starve a particular project of some asset when they need it. I'm just raising the point. And I wouldn't mind if Jared would comment on it along with you, Carol.
As I said, Dr. Mohammed, we don't have a problem with the flexibility. It's something that we can look at just to ensure that your project timelines are met. So yes, it is something that we can look into in cases where there might be some difficulty in procuring the items and in terms of the time that it is received. So yes, we can look at it. It's not a situation where we're saying, hey, we're only going to purchase it from UE and there's no other option. We will look at it on a case-by-case basis if that situation arises.
Thanks a lot, Carol. Gerard, do you have anything you'd like to add on to this?
Can I make a comment? Yeah, before Gerard responds, additional to what Asad has had mentioned, we also have some experience with this, also with Guyana, but I think it reflects other countries also. One of the important things within those projects is, for example, the exemption of taxes. And in my previous project, I faced that while doing purchase for other countries, we couldn't get the exemption of taxes because the purchase was in one country and the delivery was in the other country. And Guyana also had problems with clearing all the things that were necessary. So we should really study on those aspects. Maybe Gerard can guide us within this and then make decisions how we will do tendering, etc. It was just an additional note.
Thanks a lot for that, Angelica. And that was of a specific type of problem which we ran into, because UE is exempted from certain taxes which we can't claim. Historically, we couldn't claim against the project. But in Guyana, when we tried to deliver, for example, the Polycom systems, we had in the first project we ran as a group, we had problems and they couldn't get a tax exemption. And therefore, we did not have the resources that we lost resources in that process.
Yes. Do you want me to make a comment, Assad?
Yes, please go ahead, please, Jared.
Thank you. Yes, no, it's completely clear your concerns. And frankly speaking, from our point of view, from Brussels, you choose the way you as project think it's the best to apply. So there are no specific rules who buys and to whom delivers, etc. It can be at the level of the partners themselves or of your grantees. It can be at the level of UE, if you consider this an option. The only thing what I would like to address here is the following. Whatever you do, it should be administratively simple, not complicating matters. And the example which Angelica was mentioning, this is a very clear example of where you might run into problems. With, for example, VAT from their side, if you are saying that UE is VAT exempted, I am not quite sure, but this is what you have to figure out yourself. If, for example, UE buys a product which is not for himself, but for another party, does that mean that the VAT exemption is not valid anymore? Question mark. I do not know how this works. This is what you have to sort out with your own tax authorities. If this might, for example, mean that there are some complications and you have to come with extra documents, etc., you will then see that you are entering in more and more administrative nightmares. And I don't think anybody wants administrative nightmares. So what Carol was suggesting at the end, let's do it on a case-by-case basis. This may be the most appropriate thing to do. One thing which I do think is important to know, in order for UE to assure that all the products which are going to be bought, all your fixed assets as you call them, that they are indeed eligible costs. Now, and in that sense, it doesn't harm at all that with whatever equipment, and Carol was mentioning 10,000 TDD, which is more or less 2,000 euro, if whatever is above it, that you communicate with UE in order to see how the tender procedure and how the purchase procedure should work. I can, for example, imagine, and as another example, that it is much easier for example, Suriname to buy something from the local store around the corner within half an hour than following the UE procedures where they have to buy it, etc., and it may take 1 month. So I think you should do this on a case-by-case basis and don't make a rigid rule in this, because at the end you want to support your grantees and you want to make sure that whenever they need something, they are in the possession of this asset as soon as possible. So I would leave this open for your internal discussion and your internal best way forward. But where UE is always in CC, or where UE is always concerned, is it okay if we buy this item of less than 2,000, more than 2,000? Then you can always check already ex ante about the eligibility. And this is the most important thing. And then afterwards, what is more practical? Well, you know that VAT is a cost which is allowed in our programs or in our projects. If you're exempted, wonderful. But if you cannot claim it back, then it is an allowed cost. I'll leave it up to you.
Thanks a lot, Gerard. Those are my questions, Carol. We can have further questions from any other person as we go along, but I suspect that what we should do is, unless there's a pressing question at this stage, we would, Perry, we had talked about taking a short break. You think now might be the appropriate time to do so?
Okay, but yes, but let's say, can we take a 5-minute break then and come back?
Yes.
And Perry, before we go for break, is it also possible to have some comments on the previous interventions after the break, of course? Is it possible?
Comments on the previous sessions?
Yeah.
Well, what we were doing is that we were giving the opportunity for comments